The prankster's reckoning. April Fool's Day had always been a day of light-hearted mischief and harmless pranks. But little did I know that this year, the line between jest and terror would blur in ways I could never have imagined. It began innocently enough, with a simple invitation to a friend's April Fool's party. The evening promised laughter and camaraderie, a chance to forget the stresses of everyday life and indulge in a bit of playful trickery. And yet, as the night wore on and the hours grew late, I could sense a darkness lingering just beneath the surface, a malevolent force waiting to be unleashed. As the clock struck midnight, the party took a sinister turn. The lights flickered and died, plunging the room into darkness. Laughter turned to nervous whispers as we stumbled blindly through the blackness, searching for a way to escape the suffocating grip of fear that threatened to consume us whole. It was then that the first prank was played, a harmless scare meant to elicit a few screams and nothing more. But as the shadows danced around us and the echoes of our panicked cries faded into the night, I could feel something stirring in the darkness, something far more sinister than any of us could have anticipated. With each passing moment, the pranks grew more elaborate, more terrifying in their execution. Doors slammed shut of their own accord, objects moved of their own volition, and whispers echoed through the empty halls like the voices of the damned. And yet, even as we tried to convince ourselves that it was all just a joke, I could sense a growing unease spreading through the group, a gnawing fear that refused to be quelled. As the night wore on and the pranks grew more intense, I began to suspect that there was something else at play, something lurking in the shadows, manipulating events to suit its own twisted desires. And as the truth slowly began to dawn on me, I realized that we were not alone in the house, that we were being hunted by something far more malevolent than any prankster's antics. With each passing moment, the darkness closed in around us, its icy fingers wrapping themselves around our throats, choking the very life from our bodies. And as the first rays of dawn broke through the windows, illuminating the horrors that lurked within, I knew that we were running out of time, that we had to find a way to escape before it was too late. But even as we tried to flee from the house, to escape the clutches of the nightmare that had ensnared us, I could feel its influence growing stronger, its malevolent laughter echoing through the empty halls. And as I turned to face the source of the darkness, I realized with a sinking heart that the true horror of April Fool's nightmares had only just begun. For in the depths of the house, hidden away from prying eyes, lurked a creature of pure malevolence, a being born of nightmares and fueled by fear. Its eyes burned with a hunger that chilled me to the bone, its twisted form contorting and shifting in the darkness. And as it reached out to claim its next victim, I could only watch in horror as the nightmare unfolded before my eyes. But even as the darkness threatened to consume me whole, I refused to surrender to its grasp. With a cry of defiance, I lashed out against the creature, driving it back into the shadows from whence it came. And as the first light of dawn banished the darkness once and for all, I knew that we had survived the horrors of April Fool's nightmares, but that the nightmare would never truly be over. As the first light of dawn banished the darkness once and for all, I knew that we had survived the horrors of April Fool's nightmares, but that the nightmare would never truly be over. The memory of that fateful night would haunt us forever, a reminder of the thin veil that separates the world of the living from the realm of the damned. We stumbled out of the house, shaken and exhausted, our nerves frayed and our hearts heavy with the weight of what we had witnessed. The morning air was crisp and cool, a stark contrast to the suffocating darkness that had enveloped us just moments before. And yet, even as the light of day washed over us, I could still feel the lingering chill of fear clinging to my skin like a shroud. As we made our way back to civilization, the events of the night played over and over in my mind, each detail etched into my memory like a scar. The laughter of the creature, the terror in my friend's eyes, the overwhelming sense of dread that had threatened to consume us whole. It was all still fresh in my mind, a constant reminder of the horrors that lurked just beyond the edge of reality. But even as I tried to push the memories aside, to convince myself that it had all been nothing more than a bad dream, I knew deep down that the nightmare was far from over. The darkness that had stalked us that night was still out there, waiting and watching, biding its time until it could strike again. And so, as April Fool's Day came to a close and the world returned to normalcy, I made a solemn vow to never forget the horrors that had unfolded on that fateful night. For I knew that the darkness would always be lurking just beneath the surface, ready to pounce when least expected. And as the years passed and the memory of that night faded into legend, I could still feel its presence lingering in the shadows, a reminder of the thin line between prank and terror, between laughter and screams. For April Fool's nightmares had taught me one thing above all else, that sometimes the greatest horrors are the ones we least expect. Years went by, but the memory of April Fool's nightmares never faded. Despite my best efforts to move on and bury the events of that night deep within my subconscious, they continued to haunt me like a spectre in the dark. Each passing April Fool's Day brought with it a sense of unease, a creeping dread that refused to be ignored. I would lie awake at night, tormented by nightmares of shadowy figures and whispered promises of doom. And though I tried to convince myself that it was all just my imagination running wild, I could not shake the feeling that something malevolent was still lurking just beyond the edge of my perception. As the years turned into decades, I watched in horror as those around me began to fall victim to the same darkness that had consumed us on that fateful night. Friends disappeared without a trace, their bodies never to be found. Families were torn apart by unspeakable tragedies, their lives shattered by forces beyond their control. And through it all, the darkness grew stronger, its influence spreading like a cancer through the fabric of our reality. I could feel its presence lurking in every shadow, its whispers echoing in the depths of my mind. And though I tried to resist its pull, to fight against the darkness that threatened to consume me, I knew that my efforts were futile. For April Fool's nightmares had become more than just a memory. It had become a curse, a blight upon the world that could not be undone. And as I gazed out into the endless expanse of darkness that stretched out before me, I knew that the nightmare was far from over. But even in the face of such overwhelming darkness, I refused to surrender to despair. I vowed to stand against the shadows, to fight for the light in whatever way I could. For though the darkness may be strong, I knew that the power of hope and courage was stronger still. And so, as another April Fool's Day dawned upon the world, I prepared myself for the battle that lay ahead. Armed with nothing but my determination and the faint glimmer of hope that burned within my heart, I stepped out into the darkness, ready to face whatever horrors awaited me. For April Fool's nightmares may have taken everything from me, but it would not claim my soul without a fight. And as I stood on the precipice of darkness, I knew that no matter what trials lay ahead, I would face them with courage and resolve, for I was a survivor, and the light would always prevail in the end. The Prankster's Curse. It was April 1st, a day filled with laughter, jokes, and harmless pranks. Little did I know that this April Fool's Day would be unlike any other I had experienced before. The day started innocently enough. I woke up to the sound of my alarm clock blaring, signaling the start of another day. As I gradually made my way to the kitchen, I couldn't help but smile at the thought of the pranks my friends and I had planned for the day. But as the day wore on, things took a sinister turn. It started with small, harmless pranks, fake spiders in the coffee mug, whoopee cushions on the office chairs, but soon escalated into something much darker. It was during lunchtime when the first strange occurrence happened. I was sitting with my friends in the cafeteria, laughing and joking as we ate our sandwiches, when suddenly the lights flickered and went out. At first, We thought it was just a power outage, but then we heard it, the sound of faint whispers echoing through the darkness. I felt a chill run down my spine as the whispers grew louder, their words unintelligible yet filled with malice. And then, just as suddenly as they had started, the whispers stopped, and the lights flickered back on as if nothing had happened. We brushed off the incident as nothing more than a prank gone wrong, but as the day went on, more strange things began to occur. Objects went missing only to reappear in strange places, and eerie shadows seemed to lurk around every corner. By the time evening rolled around, I was on edge, my nerves frayed from the constant sense of unease that had settled over me like a heavy blanket. But little did I know that the worst was yet to come. As night fell and I made my way home, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that someone, or something, was following me. I quickened my pace, my heart pounding in my chest as I cast nervous glances over my shoulder. When I finally reached my apartment building, I let out a sigh of relief, thinking that I was safe at last. But as I stepped into the elevator and pressed the button for my floor, the lights flickered once again, and the elevator jolted to a stop. Panic surged through me as I realized that I was trapped, alone in the darkness with whatever malevolent force had been haunting me all day. I pounded on the doors, screaming for help, but there was no response, only the echo of my own terrified voice. And then, just as suddenly as it had stopped, the elevator lurched back into motion, the doors opening to reveal my floor. I stumbled out into the hallway, my legs weak with relief as I stumbled towards my apartment. But as I fumbled with my keys and pushed open the door, I was greeted by a sight that froze me in my tracks. The lights were off, and the room was shrouded in darkness, but in the faint glow of the moonlight, I could see them. Figures, lurking in the shadows, their eyes glowing with an otherworldly light as they watched me with a hunger that sent shivers down my spine. And then, with a suddenness that took my breath away, they lunged forward, their clawed hands reaching out to drag me into the darkness. I screamed, my voice echoing through the empty apartment as I fought against their grasp, but it was no use. The figures were too strong, their grip unyielding, as they pulled me closer and closer to the abyss. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, it was over. The figures vanished into thin air, leaving me alone in the darkness, shaken but alive. As I lay on the floor, gasping for breath, I couldn't help but wonder, was it all just an elaborate prank, or had I stumbled upon something far more sinister? One thing was for certain, this April Fool's Day would be one that I would never forget, haunted by the memory of the horrors that lurked in the shadows. Shaken and terrified, I struggled to my feet, my mind racing with fear and confusion. I stumbled towards the nearest window, desperate for the comforting embrace of the moonlight. But as I drew back the curtains, I was met with a sight that made my blood run cold. Outside, the streets were deserted, shrouded in an eerie silence that seemed to press down on me like a suffocating weight. The familiar landmarks of my neighborhood were gone, replaced by twisted, nightmarish versions of themselves that seemed to pulse with a malevolent energy. I blinked, convinced that I was hallucinating, but when I opened my eyes again, the nightmare was still there, stretching out before me like a grotesque parody of reality. With a sinking feeling in the pit of my stomach, I realized that I was trapped in a nightmare from which there was no escape. I staggered back from the window, my mind reeling with fear and disbelief. How had this happened? What had caused the world around me to warp and twist into this grotesque nightmare? And then, as if in answer to my silent questions, I heard it, the faint sound of laughter echoing through the darkness. It was a cruel, mocking laughter, filled with malice and contempt, and it seemed to come from all around me, enveloping me in its icy embrace. With a sinking feeling in the pit of my stomach, I realized that I was not alone, that whatever had trapped me in this nightmare was still out there, lurking in the shadows, waiting to strike. Heart pounding in my chest, I forced myself to move, to take action before it was too late. With trembling hands, I reached for my phone, desperate to call for help, but when I pressed the power button, the screen remained dark and lifeless. Panic surged through me as I realized that I was cut off from the outside world, trapped in this nightmare with no way to escape. I sank to my knees, tears streaming down my face as I struggled to come to terms with the horror of my situation. But even as despair threatened to consume me, a small voice whispered in the back of my mind, a voice filled with courage and determination. It was a voice that reminded me that I was not alone, that as long as I held on to hope, there was still a chance to break free from the nightmare's grasp. With newfound resolve, I pushed myself to my feet and began to explore the twisted landscape that surrounded me, determined to uncover the truth behind this nightmarish ordeal. And as I ventured deeper into the darkness, I knew that the road ahead would be long and perilous, but I also knew that I would never give up, no matter what horrors awaited me in the shadows. As I navigated through the twisted streets of this distorted reality, every shadow seemed to conceal a new terror, every corner hiding a fresh horror. I felt as though I was being watched, as if unseen eyes followed my every move with malicious intent. With each step, I felt the weight of the nightmare pressing down on me, threatening to crush me beneath its suffocating embrace. The laughter echoed in my ears, growing louder and more deranged with each passing moment, driving me to the brink of madness. But still, I pressed on, driven by a stubborn determination to uncover the truth behind this twisted April Fool's Day nightmare. I searched for any sign of normalcy, any shred of familiarity that might offer a glimmer of hope in this sea of darkness. But as the hours passed and the nightmare stretched on, my hope began to wane. It seemed as though there was no escape from this endless labyrinth of horrors, no way to break free from the grip of the nightmare that held me captive. And then, just when I thought all hope was lost, I stumbled upon a glimmer of light, a small, flickering flame dancing in the darkness. With a sense of trepidation, I approached, my heart pounding in my chest as I dared to hope that perhaps, just perhaps, this might be the way out. As I drew closer, the light grew brighter, illuminating the figure of a man standing before me, a man clad in tattered clothing, his face hidden in the shadows. His laughter echoed through the darkness, but there was something different about it now, something almost pleading. With a sinking feeling in the pit of my stomach, I realized that this man was not the cause of the nightmare, but rather another victim, trapped in this twisted world, just like me. And as he stepped forward, his hand outstretched in silent desperation, I knew that I had to help him, that together, we might stand a chance of breaking free from this nightmare once and for all. With trembling hands, I reached out to take his hand, the warmth of his touch offering a small glimmer of hope in the cold, dark night. And as we stood there together, facing the horrors that lurked in the shadows, I knew that no matter what trials lay ahead, we would face them together, united in our determination to escape the nightmare at last.